So if you're a therapist that's felt burned out, you're feeling stuck in agency systems, or sitting on a mission that you know you've wanted to do and wondering, is 2026 the year I finally build something bigger than myself, then stay with me throughout this training. Welcome, everybody. Today we're going to talk about planning for 2026. So as we head into planning for 2026, a question that keeps, coming to me, landing in my inbox is, should starting a nonprofit be one of my goals for the new year? I get this question a lot because people aren't sure about the current administration, stuff at the federal level, stuff with grants. Like, what does that mean really for starting a nonprofit in 2026? Today, I'm going to tell you the truth, the real truth, and no fluffy Pinterest stuff of, follow your passion. It's all going to be fine. And definitely not some of the outdated fear-based advice that therapists have been getting for years around starting a nonprofit or your own practice. So if you're a therapist that's felt burned out, you're feeling stuck in agency systems, or sitting on a mission that you know you've wanted to do and wondering, is 2026 the year I finally build something bigger than myself, then stay with me throughout this training because we'll go through all like the pros and cons and myths, all that kind of stuff. Here's the first thing we need to get clear on. Starting a nonprofit is not just a dream. It is actually a strategic vehicle, and it is not for everybody. But it is a move for therapists who do want to scale. They want sustainability and they also want financial freedom. And they're hitting that ceiling either in community mental health or they're hitting that ceiling in private practice. And there's different ways that people hit that ceiling in private practice. What starting a nonprofit actually means for you, your life, and your business, whether you, based on where you are right now, are fit for this pathway in 2026, right? Because it has to be a good fit for where you are now. And I see some people joining live. So the third one is the biggest myths that are holding therapists that we just honestly need to put to rest before the new year. So you can go into this already not feeling like starting a nonprofit is a barrier because of myths. So it's really important that we break those down. So whenever someone asks me, should I start a nonprofit? They're actually not usually asking about paperwork. They're really asking one of these three things. Is this actually legal? Can I really run a nonprofit and still pay myself well? Can I transition my practice into something bigger without losing everything I've already built in my private practice? Or I'm already successful in private practice, but is this the next evolution of the impact I want to make? Because I feel like there's a gap in the services that I can provide because of how expensive services are and helping my community. So those are typically the three things that people come to me with. And here's what most therapists don't realize is that a nonprofit is often the only structure that lets you solve the problem you've been about the most, and that's the lack of funding. With the lack of funding in private practice, you're often not able to scale. You hit financial ceilings, and we feel the weight of those limitations. And of course, we all know the problem in community mental health is that we're underpaid, we're overworked, we might be serving our community, but it's not in the way that we actually envisioned it happen. And it's not really sustainable mentally or physically or financially. So I think the better question is actually, do I want to build a mission or do I want to build a system that funds that mission? And those are two completely different lives that I'm going to break down for you. So I'm going to dive into some myths because this will help answer some of those questions. And myth number one is nonprofits can't generate real revenue. It's crazy the amount of times I actually hear people say this myth, and they really thought that was the case. No, nonprofits actually have more revenue pathways than LLCs or S corps, and that's because of the access to grants, corporate partnerships, reoccurring donors. It also fee for service and uh, um, the um, the ability to have scholarships for people. So the key is that nonprofits actually generate multi-million-dollar revenue streams all the time. So if you want diversified income in 2026, this is definitely the model for you. It just gives you more access to be able to serve your community. Myth number two is you can't pay yourself well. This one definitely keeps therapists trapped because we work in community mental health and we don't get paid well. There is this myth that you can't pay yourself well or that's not an option or not obtainable. but you absolutely can pay yourself a six-figure salary while working in your nonprofit ethically and legally. The IRS requires reasonableness. It does not require low wages or working for free. And the reason that you don't end up getting a sustainable salary in a large macro nonprofit like community health agencies is because they are a jack of all trades, master at none. They have multiple programs. And yes, they have multiple revenue streams, and they do often bring in multi-million dollar revenue streams. However, to run that kind of business on a large scale also takes massive overhead, and that overhead takes away from the people actually doing the service. So it just creates so much more hierarchy, and that becomes a limitation when you're talking macro level nonprofit. Myth number 3 is you lose control to the board because you're not the owner. You only lose control to the board if you are not fulfilling your duties appropriately, if you're doing something unethically, or if you build the wrong board. Your founding board is definitely a strategic decision. It is really important to have people that care about your mission, people that are not there to just take over, which honestly, most people don't want to just take over anyway because they know how much time and effort and work goes into running operations. It's really important that therapists understand that this is why they struggle with letting this part go of not being the owner, because no one actually teaches board strategy and how to build the right board that fits your mission. Your board is there to help you, not to take over you. Myth number 4 is starting a nonprofit that's too big or too complicated. I started to allude to this when I was talking about big community mental health. That is absolutely the problem that I see in community mental health. It should be simply structured. We are not, unless you want to build a huge, massive nonprofit, but that takes on a whole other level of problems and cultural related things that happen in large nonprofits. So when we're talking about building micro nonprofits that can still generate over $1 million, that is, trust me, considered a micro nonprofit. The reason why you can do this is because you already have more than half the skills needed to do this. You know how to see clients, you know how to assess, you know how to do the planning. You've already had leadership experiences. You already know how to do program design. It is the same mindset shift you make when you become a clinician. And so with this, you're leveling up to becoming the CEO, or you're shifting from owner to CEO or executive director or president or whatever you decide to do. So it's more about a shift and recognizing that we're not going to this big, huge, complicated thing that's this massive learning curve for you. You already have a lot of these skills. We're just changing the business structure and your ability to receive different funding sources. Let's see if you're ready for a nonprofit in 2026. And this is how you can kind of do your own self identity and self assessment to see if it's the right fit for you. There's usually 3 different categories to kind of tell if you're ready for this. One is that you're absolutely done with the agency ceiling and you want a legal, scalable alternative. And a nonprofit gives you room to grow past state restrictions, past productivity metrics, and past like the burnout cycles that exist in those agencies. Or you're already running a private practice that is already basically functioning as a nonprofit without the structure. You already have a for-profit that offers a sliding scale. You're already offering commercial insurance. You're already offering Medicaid or Medi-Cal or Medicare. You already have that sliding scale. You're already essentially doing the discounted work that qualifies you for a nonprofit, the community work, the actually grant eligible work, but you can't be funded in that way because you're set up as a for-profit and you're actually losing out on money because you are paying corporate income tax because you're set up as a for-profit. So if you are already doing that in your private practice and you're feeling that, then you are probably ready to transition to a nonprofit in 2026. The third case scenario is if you are already earning well but you that your impact is limited because your current business model, meaning you are trained in pretty top tier models that cost you a lot of money, and in order to create financial stability for yourself and to offset like the cost of like all those trainings that we know are very expensive but is that you have to charge premium rates. So if this is something that you're doing, and it's great if you're doing this and you're like, I'm cool with this, that's totally fine. But if you're doing this and you have a piece of your heart feeling like something's missing because you want to be able to provide those top model treatments to people that can't afford it, then this is also where you should consider starting a nonprofit in 2026. Because At that point, you're ready to build a legacy, you're ready to build a long-term system and something that essentially outlives your caseload, which is what nonprofits do. So if any of these three scenarios sound like you, then starting a nonprofit should absolutely be on your radar for 2026 planning. So let's talk about like the real benefit of it, and then I can also share a little bit about the government impact that I've seen in 2025 on this and what I'm thinking is going to happen for 2026. Of course, I can't predict anything, but I can share for sure what I've seen in 2025. So, as you think about the real benefit, it isn't about paperwork, it's about funding your mission without draining yourself. That's key. Building programs instead of just seeing more clients, increasing your income without increasing your burnout, and actually leading instead of surviving, which helps you create something that makes an impact even when you're not in the room and even when you retire. The whole point of a nonprofit is to create a legacy, a movement in the mental health field that gives accessible services without creating these micro nonprofits that burn people out, or without, having private practices that can't reach people who can't afford it. Therapists end up keep trying to fix systemic problems with the private practice solutions. And I'm not saying this model fixes the system. We are still stuck in the system of mental health and how it's set up. We're still stuck with the same reimbursement rates, but we're not going to try and fix it with private practice solutions. In 2026, we're going to fix that problem with the nonprofit solution. So here's what I recommend if you're definitely feeling this pull towards the nonprofit leadership in 2026. I have a free download if you don't already have it yet. It's called the Nonprofit Blueprint. It's going to walk you through exactly what you need to have in place first before you start filing for your nonprofit. So it goes over all the board stuff, funding stuff, and the simple structure that therapists need so that you can start to build this out without paying for anything. And if you already know that building a nonprofit is your next step, then I have a couple of different options for you to help you through this so that you set it up right the first time. You can book a 45-minute strategy session with me or a 15-minute consult. Either one is fine. We'll talk through your mission, where you feel stuck, and whether the done for you nonprofit quick start package in my program is the right fit, or the full Thriving Impact coaching program. It really depends on where you're at and what you're looking to get out of it. But one of those two options is usually the best fit for people. There's not a lot of people doing this, so I really feel passionate about getting the education out there without necessarily having to buy one of my programs. Like, that doesn't ultimately matter to me. I just want people to know that this is an option. Some people have come to me with concerns of like, well, what does this mean for our current government? Have we seen any changes? The only changes that I've been impacted on nonprofits is when there are IRS layoffs and when there was the government shutdown. It definitely delayed approval for nonprofits, but it didn't stop the approval for nonprofits. And it's really been like this wave of approvals. Prior to the administration change, the approval for getting a nonprofit was hands down no more than 3 weeks if you filed everything correctly and if you did it in the right order. When 2025 hit and there was like that initial layoff at the federal level, we definitely saw a slow in approval for nonprofits. It ended up being like anywhere from 6 to 9 months. And then towards the end of the summer in 2025, I really saw that pick up back again. And people in my program were getting their nonprofits approved even a shorter amount of time, within 2 weeks. And then when the government shutdown hit, it prolonged it a little bit more. Now it's like kind of unpredictable. Sometimes it's like a month, sometimes it's 2 weeks, sometimes it's 3 weeks. But I really haven't seen the long 9 month wait like we did during the spring. In terms of funding, large nonprofits across the US who had federal funding definitely had some cuts. There weren't cuts like all across the board, but there were definitely people who experienced cuts. But I make it really clear, actually, in my program, I'm not teaching you to go after federal grants. That is not on the table. And to me, that's really important to talk about because people don't realize this, when you go after federal grants, number one, they're highly competitive. You have to have been a nonprofit and have a proven track record with data to back that up for years and years. So if you're just starting your nonprofit, a federal grant is not the way to go. It ultimately ends up being a waste of time. let's say you actually got a federal grant, there is so much oversight and micromanagement and reporting that you have to keep track of that a lot of people don't find that it's worth it. So, what we do talk about in my program is local small grants in your community or corporate sponsorships or fundraising strategies. In the long run, I haven't seen the current administration impact the longevity of the nonprofit model that I teach or the approval. It just really depends on like the timeline of approval.